All right, well, welcome everyone. My name is Karina Sotnik. I'm the Director of Business Incubation and Accelerator Programs at the University City Science Center here in Philadelphia. And it's my distinct pleasure to welcome our panelists and especially the Acting Consul General, Kowar Nassim, who is a career diplomat who is representing Canada right now in New York, but previously was representing it all around the world, including Minneapolis. And we're so happy to have this collaboration with the Canadian Consulate to put together this webinar and also to put together an accelerator program for Canadian companies who are looking to enter the US market. So it's my pleasure to welcome Mr. Nassim to this webinar, and I'll let him open this up with a few words.
Thank you, Karina. Merci, Karina. You know, it's always good when you mention my career and you mention Minneapolis, because typically people mention my other postings like Rome and Barcelona and Amsterdam, and then people say, well, what is this guy done? He's so fortunate. So thank you for doing that. It's good for my career when they mention Minneapolis and not the other ones. Alors, je voulais vous dire bonjour à tout le monde. Good morning, everyone. I hope you are all well and safe, and for those of you with a school or a university in your lives, I hope the return to what is the new abnormal has been, I guess the best word you can use is uneventful. As Karina mentioned, I had the Canadian Consulate in New York, and I have the enormous privilege of having the great state of Pennsylvania in my territory. I'm not just playing to the crowd when I say I love Philadelphia. Josh knows that, and I would have much preferred to be there in person, but alas, it is the times, and I'm just really glad that I was able to get the technology to function today. So that's already a coup. Yeah, I'll get back there as soon as is possible. You know, in Philadelphia, Canada has the good fortune of being represented by Joshua Dillard, who's on the line today. When Josh and I sat down and he started about a year ago, one of the areas where he saw real opportunity for Canada was in the area of cell and gene therapies. Now, we know in Canada that Philadelphia is the center for this section, and you are world leaders in this area. Our ambition is to connect Canadians into this exciting network, and that's the purpose of today's discussion. You know, for my U.S. friends on the line, a few words about Canada. You know, Canadian researchers have been at the forefront of cell and gene therapies since the 1960s. We were early innovators and remain a country wedded to science and innovation. We see science and innovation as the driver of our prosperity. I should know my father immigrated to Canada via Edinburgh and Pakistan as a nuclear scientist to work at the Atomic Energy Council of Canada in 1967. So I know the import that Canada puts on science. I think the COVID pandemic has shown this commitment. You know, the lead for our government on this file, the spokesperson for this, is our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Teresa Tam. We trust in Teresa, and our government has put our money where our mouths is. In April, our government committed $40 million to launch the Canadian COVID Genomics Network, bringing together experts from across Canada to scale up research into therapies and vaccines. And the network is working with genomic institutions in the United States and the UK. We've also earmarked nearly $1 billion to research related to COVID therapies and vaccines. And most importantly, we have expressed a commitment to share the results of that research, not only in Canada, but across the globe. And this commitment was reflected in our Prime Minister joining with other world leaders in July to pen an op-ed in the Washington Post calling for equal access among countries to any COVID vaccine. The comment he made at the time was, you know, when one or more vaccines are successful, it must be a win for all of us. Any vaccines must be distributed according to a set of transparent, equitable, and scientifically sound principles, because where you live should not determine whether you live. And global solidarity is central to saving lives and protecting our economy. You know, being Canadian means realizing that successful development and testing of therapies requires partnership and working across borders. Now, despite our rivalries on the basketball court, I have to put in a plug for my Raptors, who I watched last night, and I was smiling ear to ear with my family. And the hockey arena, I know all about the Philadelphia Flyers. Canada and the United States really are the best of friends, the best of partners, and the best of allies. And that collaboration goes across culture and an economy and protection and a shared view of the world, but specifically in science, you know? So that relationship is natural and normal, and it's something that we need to encourage and foment. And this project is just going to be a great example of that, increasing that collaboration. You know, before I sign off, I do want to thank our partners, the University City Science Center, and particularly Karina Sotnik. I know from Joshua that you've worked tirelessly to bring together this outstanding panel of experts in the field for the presentation. I just want to say, you know, welcome to all of you who are visiting from Canada. A special hello to my colleague from the Quebec delegation, Laurent Vesa. Salut, Laurent. But you know, this is going to be great. I'm so excited by this project, and I wanted to just wish you all the best today, but to reaffirm to you that we are firmly committed to seeing this succeed. Back to you, Karina.
Thank you so much for your kind words. Let me just take a few moments to explain to people that might not be familiar with the University City Science Center or who we are and what we do before I launch into our really meat of the topic for today. University City Science Center is the oldest and the largest urban research park in the United States. It started in 1963. And from the beginning, it was a nonprofit institution that works with over 30 academic and research institutions in 3 states, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and New Jersey. So we're very closely working with esteemed institutions like Wistar Cancer Institute, who will be represented today on the panel, University of Pennsylvania, Rutgers University, New Jersey, University of Delaware, Princeton just joined our network. So what we do, we help those universities commercialize their really early stage life science technologies. And we've been doing this for over a decade. And based on that, we've developed a network of researchers, professionals, industry leaders, mentors, advisors, and we're leveraging this on behalf of the international companies looking to enter the US market. And that's how the Global Soft-Landing Accelerator was born, out of necessity to help companies looking at the vast and interesting and diverse US market to help them get a footing in it. And we think, everyone here on the panel thinks that Philadelphia is absolutely the right place for it, especially for companies in cell and gene therapies today. So with this, I just want to plug in that our next accelerator for cell and gene therapy in Philadelphia will start on October 12th. And if you're interested, please contact me or Joshua Dillard from the Canadian Consulate, and we will be happy to assist you. So it is my distinct pleasure to welcome all the panelists for today. And I want to introduce our moderator, Claire Marazzo Greenwood, who is the Executive Director of CEO Council for Growth here in Philadelphia and the Vice President for Leadership Engagement at the Chamber of Commerce for Greater Philadelphia. Claire will be moderating the session. She has great experience with cell and gene therapy field, and she will introduce other panelists. So Claire, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Karina. Thank you all. Acting Counsel General, thanks for joining us this morning. We really hope this will be a stimulating conversation and provide new and hopefully insightful content to all of you who are joining us today. Before we get started, I did want to just provide a few pieces of information. As Karina said, I'm Claire Greenwood. I'm Executive Director of our Chamber of Commerce, our Metropolitan Chambers CEO Council for Growth. But I'm also proud of a work that we have done, as Karina noted, over the last year and a half to really organize a focused effort to tell our region's story and to really articulate how we are one of the global hubs of research, talent, capital, and companies in the cell and gene therapy space. And it's not just a story. We have great facts and information to share that I think bolster that narrative. And I just thought I'd take a couple of minutes to share a few at the outset that hopefully will, there you go, fuel of our discussion today. So just a handful just of high level points to start, although many of you may be familiar with some of this information. So according to the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine, there are more than 800 cell and gene therapies in development across the country, or the globe, pardon me. Many of the companies working on those cell therapies, gene therapies, and tissue engineering projects are in North America. So as the Acting Counsel General noted, all of our activities combined represent more than the rest of the world in those subsectors. Specifically on the gene therapy side, more than half of all of the gene therapy trials are being conducted in the United States, so nearly 60%. So a lot of this activity is really centered here, both in the United States, certainly North America, and we know Greater Philadelphia is one of the kind of original homes of the research that really got this field started and was nurtured more than 25 years ago here in Philadelphia and the institutions here. But it wasn't just the research. Now we're continuing to develop on that basic knowledge. We've seen the first FDA-approved gene therapy come out of Philadelphia, the first FDA-approved cell therapy. 4 other FDA-approved therapies in this space have research origins in the Greater Philadelphia region. And then, of course, all of the important institutions that are foundational there, 15 major healthcare systems, 118 hospitals, 7 of those are children's specialties, children's hospitals, and 4 National Institute designated cancer centers. Deep pipeline of talent, which is robust, and I'm sure others, and you can see a number of those factoids here in the infographic that's being shared, and I know we can go deeper on some of those points in our conversation today. We try to keep track a little bit. There are, I think, plus or minus, given more than 30 cell and gene therapy development companies in our region right now. And we know they have been attracting significant investor attention and capital over just this year, 2020, which we all know has been a challenging one for lots of reasons. Our region's life science companies have seen investment valued at nearly $7.9 billion, including 730 for cell and gene therapy companies specifically. And I'm sure others will give some examples of who those organizations are and the partnerships that led to some of those investments. So just a few pieces of information to kind of whet our appetite and get our conversation started. But I know our panelists have a whole lot more to share on this subject. So let me just share their names and a little bit organizations, but I believe we'll be sharing their full bio and links to their LinkedIn profile either prior or as a follow-up. And Karina, you can, I'm sure, do some of those notes towards the end. So we have Melina Blees, PhD. She is the site director of biolabs at the Cambridge Innovation Center here in Philadelphia. Matthew Handel, CEO of Express Cells. Michael Rice, principal and head of advanced therapeutics at Cello or Cello, I'm sorry, Michael, Health Bio Consulting, and Heather Steinman, Vice President of Business Development at the Wistar Institute. So now that I botched that, Mike, let's start with you and maybe have you comment a little bit sort of on the historical trends in the cell and gene therapy field, both in the United States and maybe in particular here in Philadelphia. And I'm sure as part of that, you can touch on some of the recent, activity, including some of the acquisitions and other partnerships. So maybe, Mike, if you can get us started, that'd be great.
Sure, great. Thanks, Claire, and thank you everybody for inviting me to join the panel today. So I'm Mike Rice, principal at Cello Health Bio Consulting. I lead a dedicated advisory service that focuses exclusively on gene and cell therapies that we started about 5 years ago. Just because the level of innovation, the rate of progress on a scientific and technical level far exceeded what business models and commercial capabilities and logistical, infrastructure existed to actually support the industry. So if you haven't noticed from my accent, I started my career a little over 20 years ago as a inventor of some early gene editing technology out of Thomas Jefferson University and UPenn in Philadelphia. So my roots are in Philadelphia. And what I think really set Philadelphia ahead in this field is that very early on, after Mike Blaze and French Anderson and Ken Culver basically cured the first patient with gene therapy in 1990 out of the NIH, UPenn and other institutions in the Philadelphia area had the forward thought to actually recruit gene therapists and vector experts such as Jim Wilson and Carl June and others to really nucleate a presence in this potentially disruptive area of therapeutics, and really looking at the potential future impact of a one-time curative treatment in the continuum of therapeutic modalities, from small molecules to biologics, to gene cell therapies, nucleic acid technologies, that there's a future place for gene therapy in this continuum. That said, given the initial progress, there was a period of difficult times that Philadelphia went through after this initial investment, where the technologies were really advanced by academics as capital investment left after some significant safety, durability, and efficacy issues had arisen. And it really wasn't until some very striking cures or potential cures of various monogenic diseases, as well as a handful of different malignancies with CD19 CAR T cells, that really drove investment back into space. So those areas were clearly led by groups in Philadelphia on the clinical side, but very rapidly investment came back into space and support the whole infrastructure. That said, I think Philadelphia has really provided a foundation to think now beyond just the clinical impact and the scientific potential. How do you actually commercialize something? How do you actually put together all the pieces that you need to do to be able to actually deliver this promising therapeutic to patients on unmet need all around the globe? How do you demonstrate value based on small clinical trials that have short periods of follow-up? And then how do you demonstrate to payers the actual value that they provide? So I think, with the case that we've had, you mentioned, Claire, some of the advanced therapies that have been approved. Luxturna was probably the first one that really tested how regulatory agencies would evaluate a one-time, in this case, not curative treatment, but basically something that isn't improving survival, but is improving functional ability to go to work, to go to school, to college, maintain your quality of life, and had to demonstrate what is the value of that. So it was really interesting to see discussions that they had with the patient advocacy groups that supported the programs, the payers, and an organization, ICER, that helps evaluate and puts a value framework around these. So I think, it was that, along with the acquisition or the collaboration, I guess you would say, between UPenn and Novartis around adoptive cellular therapies, largely CAR T therapeutics, that really kind of launched the whole cell therapy business for Novartis. And again, they launched the first sort of disruptive cell therapy into the oncology market, had to deal with a very difficult environment for reimbursement, where patients that are treated in hospitals basically have a capitated cost payment, at least in the US, on reimbursement for drugs. So it makes it very difficult to bring a $470,000 therapeutic, regardless of the clinical benefit, into that space. And again, it was, Philadelphia, Novartis, Alliance for Regenerative Medicine that drove a lot of progress into thinking about, how do we get this out of this existing reimbursement environment and then provide a pathway forward there. So we'll see how that plays out in space. But one note, if you look at the, everybody talks about immuno-oncology and checkpoint inhibitors and, all the progress that's been going on there. Cell therapeutics now is the largest number of assets in development for in the immuno-oncology sector. So it's amazing to see something that, 5 years ago, there were a handful of programs. Now it's dominating the oncology development pipeline. So it shows the progress. These things are here. They're making big impacts into specific patient populations. There's probably 40 or so that we expect to be up for approval in the next 4 or 5 years. And we're projecting global revenues to exceed $16 billion just in gene cell therapies. So I'll stop there and hand it back to Claire.
Thanks, Mike. Melina, maybe I'll toss it to you to talk a little bit about how your space kind of functions in the context of this subsector, the sort of sheer number of companies that you're seeing, sort of the diversity of them, and really some of the critical issues that they're identifying. Clearly space is one of them, or they wouldn't be coming to you. But some of the others that really, I think, define the potential success of those companies in their commercial journey.
Sure, thanks, Claire, and thank you all. So I work for a company called BioLabs. We're currently a national company, soon to be an international company. We've been doing laboratory co-working spaces specific to the biotech sector for about 10 years. We started out of Cambridge and are in basically all of the major biotech hubs in the United States. So our focus has always been on providing kind of the best space and services to the best growing companies. But we're not a true incubator in the sense that we don't just take young companies, and we're not sort of focused on investing in them and kind of getting them off the ground. We're really taking companies that are frequently founded by serial entrepreneurs, have very sophisticated advisory groups at least, and also sometimes, skunkworks arms of larger companies and things like that. The one thing that really draws all of our different sites and our different companies together is a focus on quality. So the companies that come into our spaces, we bring them into a selection committee and they have to give the equivalent of a VC pitch to a panel of PhDs. Here in Philadelphia, we are partnered with the Science Center and with CIC to offer space for 200 scientists to companies of all sizes. And the thing that's been really exciting about Philadelphia to us is that the quality of the companies has been incredibly high. Our success rate at selection committee in Philadelphia has been much higher than at our other sites, just because the companies are so sophisticated and really, really promising. Even when they're very small and just starting out, they really have the science behind them, they have the talent behind them, and that's really exciting to see. So we have 12 companies in our space right now that range from kind of 1 or 2 person young startups up through skunkworks arms of large public companies. We had Amicus Therapeutics with us for a while, which is a large and very successful company that's taking 3 floors in our building at this point. Century Therapeutics, who started with 3 scientists in our early days and now is 80 people, a cell therapy company. And so, the range is huge, but the thing that really has stood out for us about Philadelphia is that quality. And the interesting thing is that, like I said, we started in Cambridge, and kind of in the early days that BioLabs was here in Philly, we heard a lot of people say, I'm interested in Philadelphia, it seems promising. It seems exciting, but I think we're going to start in Boston or San Francisco and kind of start there. And then within about a year, we started to see people coming back to us and saying, we were out in California talking to a VC and they were saying, why would you leave Philly? It's really the place for cell and gene therapy. And that's really what we're seeing as more and more companies come into Philadelphia from outside because they want access to those partnerships, to those resources, and especially to that talent pool. Because, you know, a lot of these folks are looking to hire extremely specialized skill sets. And Philadelphia has done a great job because of that kind of long tradition and the institutions of drawing talent from across the globe to Philadelphia, folks who are going to do graduate school or postdocs or jobs in industry here in Philadelphia that they can then tap for their talent pool. And, you know, folks like to live in Philadelphia because it's a great city and it's a relatively affordable city. So it's also pretty easy to keep talent here, which is a really big thing. So that's been a really exciting thing to watch happen. Just, you know, I mean, certainly it's been an extraordinary location for science for a very, very long time. And that's, you know, down to the hard work of everyone from, you know, the Science Center, the Wistar, to Penn, and the city. And it's really, really blossoming now to the point that we're, you know, seeing this recognition at the national and global levels.
Thank you. Maybe I'll pick up on a comment you made around partnerships and throw that to you, Heather. Clearly, the Wistar Institute, I think, has a well-known track record in developing really important partnerships, both sort of across institutional for lots of reasons, but also with industry. So maybe talk a little bit about the breadth of those kinds of research partnerships, certainly at Wistar, but with other institutions. And I think Mike referenced this as well, that I think are also fueling the commercial success to some degree. And I think we're seeing in cases like Amicus and others that are actually part of the allure and draw for companies to be in the Philadelphia market.
Thank you, Claire. Good morning, everybody. So I've been trying so hard not to interrupt Melina. Or you, Claire. And Mike, I learned an awful lot from you today. So I couldn't be any more delighted. I'll try to keep it short. But I think what is extremely evident is the not only the tremendous aggregation of talent and activities, but I think what may not have come through yet today is that even though we started a long time ago, almost all of those activities are happening now. So it is extremely vibrant and things are changing on like a daily basis. All of this is new, so you know we're continuing to grow our community and all around sort of cell gene therapy, but all of the sciences, so all the biomedical sciences. So it's such an exciting time. So I just don't want our friends to know or think that like the market is saturated and we've been here for so long. We've been doing great science for a really long time. But as Mike had alluded to, we're starting to get now to that point of how can we best implement, translate our discoveries for commercialization, which is changing the whole paradigm for the capital attraction. So to Melina's point, absolutely, everyone on the East Coast and the West Coast are now targeting Philadelphia when they're looking to make their investments, which has really been transformative for the companies that have been starting up here and the companies that are moving here, even from New Jersey and other states across the US as well as around the globe. So right now, there's like so much energy going on in Philly. And a lot of that comes down to the collaboration, which is also wild. And I appreciated the opening statements as well from our friends. And that is simply because everyone actually wants to work together. So to take a step back, and it's interesting because all the panelists in one way or the other are already connected. And even if we don't know one another, chances are we've already worked with one another or we're friends with someone else. So we have such a tight-knit community here, it is really easy to do business. And I think when science is so difficult and it could take 10, 20, 30 years to get a new therapeutic strategy out to the public, you need good friends and you need a very strong support network and infrastructure. And that's what Philly has. So My role is in helping our scientists at the Wistar Institute translate their discoveries into commercializable opportunities. But needless to say, if we're a big discovery engine, that's only 32 labs, by the way, and we've been here since 1892. We've had 8 products on the market. We've been sitting smack dab in the middle of University City. And we love to work with all of our colleagues across the region and in the surrounding states. So we do view ourselves as an expandable network because not only do our scientists work together, but all of our tech transfer offices, the business development people, all of the startup infrastructure to help our companies that are externalizing our technologies, everybody collaborates. And I hope Matt will speak to that as well, not to put him on the spot, but I do think, you know, given his experiences and seeing firsthand how everyone is integrated, you don't have to go very far. All you have to do is pick up the phone and chances are there's going to be a solution for your company. So what I can tell you is that I spent 10 years in the Boston area before coming to Philly. I've been here for 12 years. And I can't say more that there's such a contrast. It's a great place. Don't get me wrong, and I love the ocean. However, Philly has it all because we've got all the people, we have the science, we have the startups, we have now the capital that's coming in. And to add to that, we have all of the training. So we have very custom specialized training that goes beyond, you know, forget, and they're all highly valued PhDs, you know, being one myself, but there's other talent bases where people are learning how to produce cell-based therapies and do manufacturing and work for CROs and get jobs within the whole pharmaceutical infrastructure. So we have, what, 800-900 pharmaceutical and biotech companies, I believe, in the immediate region, if I'm not mistaken. And if all of those companies are here to benefit from the talent that's coming through all of the training that's going on at all of our academic institutions, you can imagine that's an immediate work line and pipeline of talent for you to fill positions quickly. And in some of the more innovative discussions that are ongoing with other companies that are local, like Integral Molecular, they're looking at ways of being able to quickly pivot and turn the talent base from Science One into business development to help with some of those discussions for selling services and being able to generate and support all the activities that are going on here. So I suspect also Matt can speak to that. But there's a lot going on. So not only are there talented scientists from an expert level in every discipline across the board for ex vivo manipulation of cells to actually administering them to patients with all the support infrastructure for doing clinical trials, to be able to do the manufacturing to the testing and all the proof of concept in people. So not only cell-based therapies, but also gene therapies and also every single variety that is popping up in this industry, it's all here. And so from that perspective, just keep in mind, we're not saturated and there's plenty of room for collaboration. So the whole point that Claire wanted me to talk about, which I haven't actually talked about yet, even though I told everyone I would be succinct, I'm sorry, I lied, is that if you can imagine all this research going on and everybody collaborating, we've taken it a whole extra level by creating the Philadelphia Research Consortium. So keep in mind, if you want to explore doing research with our research institutes across the board, we've already built all the instruments that you need to be able to do so. So we have universal template agreements that would effectively just have one conversation with one institution. We have over 14 members now at this juncture. We continue to grow. There's no fees. There's no administration. It's as easy as picking up the phone and saying, I want to work with a scientist, or I have a problem and I want to figure this out. Can you help me do X, Y, Z? And before you know it, all the tech transfer heads have already agreed that they'll honor this form. And the form is already established to be useful for the company. So it's structured with the vantage point of what would help the company be as successful as possible, so you're not wasting money, so you're being as efficient as possible, and you're protecting all your intellectual property that you need to, but still coming up with new innovations. So that said, there's a ton of additional information. I'll stop now, but it's called the Philly Research Consortium. Anyone can join and participate, and it will give you access to any institution that you want to. And those that aren't official members are still very supportive of the concept and want to work with industry partners. So please know this is a very welcoming region that really truly supports collaboration and takes it an extra step to work towards doing even more activities together to make it easier for companies to do science. So that's it.
Thanks, Heather. Thank you. No, thank you. Appreciate it. And I think you set Matt up well. Matt, it'd be great to hear your perspective as CEO of a company. I think Heather raised a couple of points that would be really interesting to get your take on and your perspective in how you've started and run your business here in Philadelphia.
Thank you, Claire. So just so you know what my business is, we're a genetic engineering company, but we're not working on therapeutics. We actually create cell lines to support research. And I think that's really important because we spend a lot of time talking about the therapeutic side of the business or diagnostics, for example. But if you're running a company, and especially if you're running a lab, you can't do it without extensive resources. We've already heard from Melina about one important resource, which is space. And not just having space, but having well-equipped space that's affordable, which I think has been incredibly important in Philadelphia. I'll be honest, we've looked at the cost of space in other cities. Philadelphia is very cost-effective. And I think that's an important factor that people don't often take into account. But there are a few other things that you need as well. One is you need talent, and talent is vital for building a business. And Philadelphia actually has really two sources of talent that I think are really important, one of which people often think about, which is universities. I need to get scientists on board. I need to get people who are knowledgeable. And you've already heard representative, we've got Wistar, for example. We have Penn, we have Temple, we have Jefferson. I could keep going. We're actually hiring right now. We need to hire a scientist. We posted on Tuesday, we already have 13 resumes. And if you look at them, they're a mix of people who are in industry, but also in academia. But academia is a great pipeline, especially when you have a startup, because you can get people who have great experience, but are ready to move on from that academic environment. The second source is something that's often considered a bad word, big pharma. And people will say, oh, I don't want a big pharma person. They are bureaucratic. They're not entrepreneurial. I've got to disagree. I spent over 20 years in big pharma. I know a lot of entrepreneurs coming out of big pharma, but when you're looking to hire a really skilled scientist, one of the things that stands out is most of these people are ready to go on day one. You don't have to explain what GLP is. Or GMP. They've been living in those worlds ever since they started. One of my favorite is documentation. What you need to document in an academic lab is enough. Nothing against academia, but usually you're trying to generate a paper. And there's often a 6-month transition when people realize in an industry lab, if you're working on something that'll be filed with the FDA, the amount of documentation the FDA requires, or Health Canada, or the EMA is tremendous. So we have these great scientific people ready to come in. But I want to talk about a third group as well, because we've already heard discussion about commercialization. A lot of startups put together a great scientific team, and then they figure they'll get to commercialization one of these days. Mm-hmm. I come from the new products world. That doesn't work. You have to be thinking commercial from the beginning. You might say, what does that have to do with my phase 2 study? Well, the endpoints you pick had better be endpoints that your customers, the physicians, the healthcare professionals, the managed care plans, that they care about. And I've seen too much phase 4 studies, which will cost tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to make up for poor choices made when you could have done it with a $10 million phase 2. So you can get all of that talent in Philadelphia. But the other thing that I think is important, and this is where I'm going to be honest, a company like mine comes in, is the support. You need people who are going to be doing things such as you need equipment. That sounds easy, but you need services. And there are a lot of those services based here in Philadelphia. We heard Integral Molecular already mentioned, for example. You know, you don't have to try to find them. They literally are in your building. I'll say, for example, we have one client that literally sent us, one of their scientists spoke to one of our scientists and said, hey, why haven't we worked together yet? And it's that type of opportunity that I think stands out. There's one last thing that I also want to bring up, which I think is important as well. And that's when you're looking for new areas to grow. Most startups have the story about when they pivoted. Maybe a little pivot, maybe a big pivot. If you're going to, very often those pivots come because of serendipity or they become because of interactions. I know many companies in gene therapy and in cell therapy that have pivoted. You know, they started with one target and they switched. When you switch, you need to be able to move quickly. And again, that comes back to having resources. You know, the day you decide that your you know, product that you've been working on for as a cancer therapeutic might actually help with, for example, regenerative medicine for restoring eyesight. Better find someone who can work very quickly. The nice thing is we have that opportunity here, and it spans basic research, clinical research, commercialization. So I think, you know, the ability to leverage that service industry, the ability to leverage connections, and the ability to find talent is really heightened here in Philadelphia. And I'm going to give you one last example of how this all comes together. I've got a small company. We didn't want to spend $80,000 on a cell sorter. So we started doing a little investigating, and Heather knows this. Turns out that Wistar, which is a 10-minute walk from her office, they have a cell sorter.
And we're happy to help companies.
Thank you. So rather than spending $80,000 on a sorter, we're spending several hundred, I won't give away the number, Heather, per hour to be able to use their cell sorter. And if you're a startup, the thought of, wow, I can spend hundreds of dollars for one project instead of 80,000 that my investors will freak out about is great. That's just one example of what we can do here in Philly.
That's great. Thank you, Matt. Others feel free to chime in should you wish. I do want to make sure, Karina, we hold a little time for questions. Yeah. So I'll pose one more, but this is sort of a heads up for folks if you want to add a question in the chat or raise your hand, which hopefully we've all been doing this long enough. Folks know how to use that function to do just that. But Karina, maybe you want to talk a little bit about your work with global companies who are expanding in the US. Clearly our interest is this market and how it compares to others, but feel free to share a little. And then I think we have one question that just came in, which we'll get to next.
Thank you, Claire. And I just want to piggyback on something that Matt said. So as I mentioned, University City Science Center has Global Soft-Landing program where we work with global companies who are looking to enter US market. Now, to be clear, those companies do not have to be startups. We work with companies of all ranges. They need to have some traction in the region where they are. But even for well-established companies that say they've been on the market for 10, 20 years, entering US market might feel like a startup again because US market is different, especially in healthcare. And so we've established the Global Soft-Landing program specifically to help companies understand what Matt said, the commercialization portion of it. How do you deal with reimbursement strategy? US and Canada might be very close culturally, but when it comes to healthcare, we're so vastly apart, right? US healthcare is something else. So we work with companies that can open up that black box and talk about how to approach reimbursement, how to deal with payers, what would be the patient's story. Companies work with mentors that come from the industry that can actually form that strategy for them the regulatory strategy that is obviously different here as well. So we put all those elements together. And what I like to say is companies don't know what they don't know. So when they come out of our program, they have a roadmap where they uncover things and they have better understanding. And sometimes, yes, sometimes they have to pivot when they're coming to US market. So that's something that is open to them as well. I just wanna, I don't want this to be an infomercial for Philadelphia, but I just wanna cite a couple of statistics about Philadelphia. For people that maybe don't know exactly where Philadelphia is, we're really strategically located between Washington, DC with the regulatory and New York with capital. But what people might not know is that Philadelphia is located in a place where you have access to 70% of US and Canadian population within a 5-hour drive. So just let it think in, right? So 5-hour drive and you have access to 70% of our population. We're 5 hours away by flight from Europe and 5 hours away by flight from California. So that places us in a really good strategic geographical place. But as everyone said here, we're also a hub, obviously, for innovation in life sciences. And we have a lot of industry located here, and we have a lot of academic institutions located here, so access to talent becomes pretty easy. All right, let's open it up for questions because we spoke long enough.
I think we did have one here in the chat, curious about the panel's perspective on the importance and role of cross-national collaboration, whether that's around best practices for the approval process, bringing scientists together or working on the same kinds of disease areas. If folks can react and maybe give some perspective on that, I think you can read the full question here. But do you see a greater need for the industry to be collaborating not only within a community like Philadelphia, but with other communities and certainly across country lines? I think is the gist of the question here. So maybe Matt, since we ended with you, we can start there unless you'd like to defer to somebody else.
No, I'm happy to chat. So I always think, we're talking specifically about NGOs. I like to expand it to simply say non-industry, because how do you characterize an NGO, for example? Would you consider academia to be one, or even government? Because we see quite a bit of collaboration, for example, being sponsored by the universities right now, and I think that's really important. They are a great source for cross-border collaboration, and also for bringing the question was bringing together scientists working on common elements. I see a lot of that going on right now through government work. I know it's a little cliche to talk about COVID-19, but I think that's a really good example. When you look at Project Warp Speed, whether you like that name or not and what it implies, there's a heavy Philadelphia presence there, but there's a really nice mix of both industry and academia right now. I know we're in a crisis. I know that's more the exception rather than the rule, but I think we're seeing more and more of those as well. I think you see some of this as well where, and it may not always be led by the NGO, but it's industry working with the NGO. To use Spark for a minute, I know that, for the work they're doing around blindness, but also for hemophilia, a lot of people, forget that their second product target is hemophilia. They're actually working pretty closely with the patient advocacy groups, for example. And I think those groups are important because very often when it comes time for FDA approval or Health Canada approval, I can't speak to the EMA, having support from those patient advocacy groups really matters. So I do see that. Having said all the positives, I'm going to end with one caveat though. Everyone has their own agenda. And I don't mean that in a negative way. If you're working on hemophilia, the patient groups want to work with industry, but everyone has a slightly different view of what they'd like to have. So in the end, a company still needs to make sure that they have a clear strategy and they know what they want to get out of that relationship.
Claire, if I can just quickly add one thing. So University City Science Center is part of the 13 accelerators around the country that partnered with BARDA. BARDA is our government agency, Bioadvanced Research and Development Authority. And BARDA is one of the few government agencies that's actually looking for solutions worldwide. And that's where this global collaboration comes to. So Science Center always looking for solutions to COVID, the vaccination, the patient monitoring, and we are working with companies worldwide to obtain that government funding, which is so important.
Thank you. Mike, you're unmuted. Did you want to make a comment there based on your work with client companies?
No, I would just, echo what Matt was saying about the role of patient advocacy has really kind of driven this field, at least supporting and providing non-dilutive financing to get from, preclinical, potential to translating in man. The challenge again is once you establish proof of concept, often in very small cohorts of patients, how do you think about doing that pivot from thinking about being a scientific, clinically focused company to how do you build all the infrastructure to think about commercializing it and think about, all the data that you need to, provide, support for the value of it. So I think that's where, coming back to the importance of Philadelphia is that, we've done it now several times, right? So we have a lot of experienced people that have come, risen to the challenge very rapidly. It's still work in progress because, risk sharing schemes for supporting, value-based price sharing around curative treatments that we don't know if they're going to be curative or not because we don't have the data to follow patients all that long. And, BioMarin's hemophilia A program, is facing some questions about that. I think some of it we could think as, could be a known risk of providing gene transduction in a, dividing cell versus a non-mitotic cell. But risk sharing is kind of an interesting space to figure out how do we adapt that to different diseases that may have different criteria that determine benefit.
So maybe just to follow on that, another Mike for you and others, feel free to add the process of working with payer networks for these new therapies. And that you talked about risk sharing, but this sort of demonstration of need versus value, particularly with the insurance market. If you could expand on that a little bit more, it sounds like there's some interest there.
Yeah, I'm not deep in the market access space. We have a different group that does that, but I guess the experience that I've had, and it's a case-by-case basis. I mean, the Lextorna story was very different than Zolgensma for spinal muscular atrophy. And, I had the privilege to be pretty close to that program and the whole Advocacy story from its inception. And, they were the case where you had data in eight patients. They IPO'd and then had to figure out how do they actually think about the pivot, because you can get approval based on, phase 2 data. On a single arm trial, and all of a sudden you have to think about, okay, well, how do I provide assurance to my investors that we can grow, we can keep growing the company, that we can actually commercialize this ourselves, we can bring in additional pipeline products for future growth. And so that was the context of that. But as far as the value proposition, and in the case of spinal muscular atrophy, which is, a neonatal sort of emergent situation where, you need to identify patients and treat them very rapidly, especially with type 1 SMA. Otherwise you lose clinical benefit if you're treating later in life. But it's an area where we've already had expensive drugs, Spinraza, that came into the space that's was $750,000 first year of therapy, $350,000 every year after. Basically, ICER had adapted a different model to support not just using the NICE quality assessment, but also thinking about additional quality life years added based on these transformative therapies that are extending survival in space. So Zolgensma had a little bit of an easier story to support the value proposition, because you can quickly think about how, lifetime treatment of expensive therapies that don't necessarily, have as much clinical impact as potentially a gene therapy, how you can support a price as high as $5 million for a treatment. In this case, they launched still the most expensive drug at $2.1 million, but it was a clear, basically, calculation that they could provide as far as cost offsets for expensive therapies and additional years of life added.
Great. Thanks, Mike. I know we're coming up on our hour. Maybe one thing we haven't addressed quite as much, I don't know if we can do it in a lightning round, but let's give it a quick shot. We talked about a number of other resources, space, the sort of provider and service community around companies, the talent as critical resources, but we haven't necessarily addressed capital to the same degree. I'd love to just get a quick reaction from all of you in terms of your view of the nature of that constraint on these continued discoveries and their commercial viability. And I know I cited some statistics specifically around the success of cell and gene therapy companies in our region in raising capital, but any other kind of future-looking observations you might make. So Mike, we'll try to do this in a real short 30 seconds to a minute observations, and we'll try to get down the line quickly. And then I think Karina will close us out with a few comments. So Mike, can you kick us off there?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so the outlook for the future is, kind of interesting in this COVID environment and the election coming up. So far, the first half of 2020 has been a record year as far as Series A investment, follow-on investments, IPOs. And a lot of it has to do with the low cost of capital and the recognition of the value of innovation to addressing unmet needs, such as coronavirus and future epidemics that we might face. But beyond infectious disease, it's really impacted this whole space. So going forward, I don't know. There hasn't been a lot of acquisitions yet this year, so we'll see what's going to happen towards the end of this year. But certainly, very significant Series A, around new companies, follow-on investments, IPOs. So we'll probably see a lot more follow-on investment going in the future, and acquisition. At some point, we'll see some aggregation. And just to talk about the Philadelphia area with the pharma, I think Matt brought up, the pros and cons of having a lot of big pharma people around. But there is a huge source of capital around there, and the majority of them, GSK, BMS, Novartis, others are invested in the space and have facilities that could be turned over from their biologic space into cell and gene therapy manufacturing. So I think there's a big ecosphere to support further capital investment into not just Philadelphia, but the whole sector.
Great. Thanks, Mike. You're in a row on me, so I'm going to do Heather, Matt, and then Melina, and then we'll close it out with Karina. So Heather.
All right. So in addition to what Mike was saying about the big pharma, don't forget, it is a ripe opportunity to be able to do a strategic partnership with one of the big pharma, because that will just make you look more attractive for capital. So why not have your friends already queued up for a staged acquisition later on? It makes a lot of sense. So That's something that is really important, I think, for this region and how we all sort of aggregate once again. And the second point I would make is just simply that a lot of deals are being done earlier. Now is the opportunity for even preclinical, pre-phase 3 trials. So that whole range is more attractive and people are dropping a lot more money. So I think given that people are willing to invest in earlier stage technologies, you have better opportunities and you have a whole network to do some partnering before even worrying about other larger sources of capital. Thanks. Matt?
Not a lot to add. Two things. One, when it comes to capital, when we raised money, we did it locally, but we also got money from outside. That's an important thing to bear in mind, which is that money can travel anywhere, even if we're not allowed to in a time of COVID. So Philadelphia's got a very good angel network. It's got, you know, a good sense of startup money. I'm not going to deny that you probably need to expand your field when you're trying to raise that Series B of $30 million. But that's okay, because if you can get the startup money and you can get traction, that gives you legitimacy. And I'm going to add that comes again from the legitimacy you can get from working, say, with the Science Center, which is somewhat selective and it gives you a mark of quality.
Great. And Melina?
You know, my perspective is relatively narrow. I live in the world of our little kind of sub-community in Philadelphia, but just our residents in 2019 raised around $300 million. So that tells you that the money is there, and the money is there for cell and gene therapy, which is, you know, by far the dominant kind of resident community that we see. So that's a tiny slice of life in Philly, but I think it's a representative one.
Great. Thanks. Karina, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, and I just want to add, working with a lot of companies, it used to be that they all lament that money is elsewhere outside of Philadelphia, and now we see such an influx of money, especially from outside. And if we look at the recent acquisitions, most of them from Europe, and it's a really good trend that Philadelphia starts to attract foreign capital. So this was a terrific panel. As it is with the Zoom, my cat is about to enter the screen. But I want to thank everyone. If you have any questions, I'm sure any one of us are happy to connect and explore. Again, we're here to help you, the Canadian company, with anything you need, with partnerships, with ways to access this market, with potential collaboration. This is what we love to do. This is what Philadelphia is all about. And as our panelists just highlighted, we're all sort of one big community, because every one of us know each other somehow. And if we don't, we know of each other. So I want to thank everyone again. This has been a terrific hour. And thanks to people who tuned in that early in the morning. Some of you probably tuned in from the West Coast, and I really appreciate that. And we're looking forward to our collaboration with Canadian Consulate and with companies. So,
and Karina, if I may, this is Josh with the Consulate. Yes. I just want to personally thank all of our panelists for, I think it was a great discussion to start kicking off what I hope is going to be a relatively long-term engagement, specifically in cell and gene therapy, between Philadelphia and Canada through our office in Philadelphia. So thank you all for helping us with this inaugural event, and we look forward to having you engaged as we move forward.
Thank you, everyone. And I will be sending to Josh all the bios and contact information for all the participants, so you can contact us. And again, application is open right now for our Global Soft-Landing Accelerator. The deadline is September 28th. So I encourage you to apply, and looking forward to meeting you all in person one day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.